afternoon, good evening, good morning. In the papers today, there have been articles about Harare City council officials buying luxury cars. There's been it is on record that Harare City Council, like many other cities up and down the country, have failed to deliver even some of the most basic services, like making sure that people have got clean running water, refuse is collected, the roads in the cities are maintained, and sewage system is working. So when one reads a story like this one, Harare town clerk Chisango's acquittal in US 9 million fraud case, one despairs. How are we going to end the corruption? Some of the people who are being squeezed hard to pay their rates are absolutely desperately poor people. And yet, they're being asked to pay their rates on the one hand, and on the other, government is squeezing them in terms of paying tax. And then you find the money is being wasted. The article on the vehicle says that the town clerk drives one of the expensive cars that cabinet ministers drive. So he's competing with cabinet ministers. And yet, the city council is failing to provide even the most basic services. Here is a photograph of one of the flats in Harare. As you can see from the whole building, the walls are covered. The sewage system is blocked to the point where it's going all the way back to the building itself. And so raw sewage is flowing over the walls. And that is why you see all that discoloration. How are we going to deal with this problem? Is a question that must be answered. At the present moment, we really are failing to address it as a nation. One can trace the start of corruption from soon after independence. Here is Dr. Simba Makoni explaining how corruption started in Zimbabwe. Just a few months after the country's independence.
I recall very clearly that when we came into office in 1980, we inherited Ian Smith's systems. And Ian Smith's ministers drove Peugeot 504s. They drove themselves from home to work in their Land Rovers and all in kinds. Most of them were farmers. They parked their Land Rover and then they used the government vehicle when they were at work with a chauffeur. When they finished at night, they packed them and they took theirs to go home. Within the month of our coming into office, Prime Minister Mugabe then directed that every minister be issued with an E-class Mercedes-Benz, and the Peugeot 504s were retired to permanent secretaries, and the deputy ministers who then took over. We can also look at many other things, small they may appear at the time. Let me hazard that even at that point, Enos Nkala was our Minister of Finance. I don't think we knew what budget we inherited from Ian Smith when the decision was taken to buy those E-class fleets for the ministers. So the material affection for material things has always been with us. And the differentiation also, even going back into the camps, Zemashefu, Neze, my comrades, Makada, were not the same. So much so that even today, when the so-called Minister for Presidential Affairs or Provincial Governor, as they were, goes to Bubi or Binga, they will be served separately and differently from the other people. The avarice grew as we began to exploit the opportunities of office. When I was in the government, the minister was allocated one vehicle that they kept, which was the sedan they used in town. If you needed to go off-road, then your ministry hired off-road vehicles from the CMED, and you were charged for it. Now a minister will have an average of 4 vehicles in his forecourt, all at government's expense.
So the leadership modeled the wrong kind of behavior, and that kind of behavior permeated all across our society. Our CEOs, like you're saying, heads of parastatals and so forth, modeled from the top.
Indeed. Indeed. I made a passing reference that we have CEOs who will buy themselves a luxury car when they can't pay wages at the end of the week or end of the month. This has been so entrenched in our psyche, this showing off, as if you are a different person. You're breathing different air from those who don't drive Prados and Land Cruisers, from those who don't drive Jeep Cherokees. We have lost our humanity. There's lots of reference to Ubuntu, very farcical, superficial, not coming from the heart. We have changed. We have changed because of our appetite for power. And we have changed because of our avarice for material things. I think when we begin to associate a position of authority and responsibility with material well-being and acquisitions, that's when the rot set in. A Toyota Cressida isn't worth much compared to 6 kgs of gold and 15 billion worth of Maranga diamonds and backhanders on contracts to pave 200 kilometers of roads. So when you ask, is there a moment? There is not one, but quite clearly, I think we began to change noticeably in the latter half of the 80s into the early 90s. Our character became preoccupied with power, with control, and with accumulation. That's where I would put the starting line.
It is true, and it is tragic. I think what makes the whole thing even more untenable is that we have entrusted those who are benefiting from the corruption to end corruption. That's just nonsense. They are benefiting from it. And so all their attempts to end it is at best just trimming the edges. The big fish, the real big guys, are never caught. You catch the little ones. And they have the confidence of being corrupt themselves because they can turn around and say, well, the chefs themselves are corrupt. And some of them, they are holding the chefs as blackmail. If I am named, I will sure as hell I'm going to make sure that I bring down some of the big fish. And when the big fish, of course, realize that, they'll see to it that we are quickly released. So we end up with this situation where it's catch and release and nothing gets changed. But when you look at a situation where the country is in total economic meltdown and the political situation has reached a point of destabilizing the whole country, if not the whole region, one has got to say we have got to find a way out of this mess before it's too late. I think sometimes we never dreamed that we could backslide to become another failed state. Look at what is happening in Libya, Sudan, Somalia, and many other countries whose system of government have failed the nation, and the things have been allowed to deteriorate to the point where the whole system of government completely collapsed. And then it's survival for the fittest. And once you've reached that point of no return, restoring law and order becomes even more difficult. We can stop the madness in Zimbabwe, but what we've got to realize is we cannot stop it without addressing the root cause of it, the politics. ZANU-PF leaders believe they have the divine right to rule the country and to loot. This is why the country has failed to remove the ZANU-PF these last 45 years. I think we need to sit down and seriously look at this problem. Because it's not as if ZANU-PF leaders are invincible. They are not. Indeed, if we had implemented the democratic reforms when we had the golden chance to do so in 2008 to 2013, ZANU-PF will be history. We've got to look at why did we waste that opportunity? And more importantly, look at it with a view of if we are going to stop repeating the same mistake, we've got to know what went wrong during that GNU. Unfortunately, we have got people with what I can only call as a tribesman mentality. they belong to ZANU-PF camp, and they will defend and support the leaders no matter what. And by the same token, those who support the opposition, they support the opposition leaders no matter what. This has not helped the country move on. The number one purpose of the opposition was to implement the democratic reforms to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. In other words, we cannot end the ZANU-PF dictatorship without the opposition doing their work, implementing the reforms. And so after 25 years of MDC, Triple C on the political stage, and not even one token reform in place, we have to ask, why have they failed to implement even one reform? Because as long as they keep on pretending that they're going to end the ZANU-PF dictatorship, whereas they're doing nothing about it, we will remain stuck with this failed tyrannical political system. ZANU-PF rigged the 2023 elections, but they only managed to get away with it because the opposition participated in those elections in their millions. They conned their supporters to participate in those flawed elections in their millions. The question that SADC leaders had to ask themselves is, why did you participate when you knew the process is flawed? The opposition participated because they believed the idiotic lies from the likes of Nelson Chamisa that he had plugged all the vote rigging loopholes. Of course, he was lying. Why some people are refusing to accept that Chamisa lied beggars belief. Because by refusing to accept that Chamisa lied, you're leaving the door open for him to do the same thing again, which is exactly what happened. In 2018, Chamisa lied about having stringent measures to stop ZANU-PF rigging the elections. He was never held to account. And so he was able to lie again in 2023. The political and economic crisis in Zimbabwe is getting worse and worse by the day. As long as people sit and twiddle their thumbs, they must know that one of these days it will get the point of no return. The country will slide into political instability, which will be very difficult to get out of. Food for thought. Thank you very much, those who were able to tune in, and I hope you'll be able to join us again tomorrow. Same time, 6 o'clock UK time, 8 o'clock Zimbabwean time.